First of all, you're like one of the most interesting humans in the world and one of my favorite people. And I'm really grateful that you're willing to do this. No, you keep that accent. It gives you so much credibility. I feel like people with accents just like walk into a room and automatically have more credibility. Keep the accent. Keep the accent. Don't let it go. So you've built your own business. I mean, your story is incredible. So you come over, you're doing some personal training, you get into guarding just out of desperation.
Right.
You rise to the top, and you're one of the most sought after guards. You end up dating Heidi Klum, and then you kind of that ends, and you start your own thing, or you're running your own company, and you get married, and you marry an amazing American who I adore, and you guys are just the coolest couple. How did that come in? Well, and then I felt like the world's luckiest pastor guy because you started then to guard and protect our space. And
the volunteers for the security team.
Yeah, you started to lead the volunteers, and then I mean, it was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Martin Kirsten is.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I love about you, Martin, is that you let yourself hurt to the core. Like you care deeply, and you love people well. And so when things don't go well, when the worst case scenario happens, you're not a cold, callous guy. You feel all the feelings, and you care deeply about what you do, and you care deeply for people.
Thank you.
And I don't think I wouldn't think that that's normal for people at your level of protectors.
Yeah.
So you're building your security company.
Mm-hmm.
You're married to someone incredible. You're still living in Orange County.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the future holds? Where do we go from here? We agreed.
The teaching.
You're hanging on to the accent.
Stay with the South African.
Well, I appreciate you, dude, and I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your genius. You're good at what you do.
Thank you.
Well, it's going to be fun to have you at the retreat.
We're there.
And just not formally as the protector, but just your presence there.
Try to turn it off.
Yeah, try to turn it off. Just
sit with my back to the door.
No, we know that you're not going to sit with your back to the door, but your presence there will make everyone feel more comfortable. And I just appreciate you as my friend and as a dude doing good stuff in the world. And the journey that you're on, man. You're on an incredible journey. Thanks, Martin.
Love you, brother.
Love you, man. Cheers.
A couple of weeks ago, I did a Google search for Martin Kirsten interview, just looking to see if there's anything new, because I hadn't really looked him up in a while. And I looked across a couple of different search engines, and this is all I found. But I'd never seen it before. This apparently came out 3 years ago, in 2020. So I figured we'd take a close look at it and kind of take it apart. Now, for those who don't know, Martin Kirsten was the bodyguard of Chris Cornell at the time that he died back in 2017. Martin Kirsten, we're told, was the last person to see Cornell alive. We're told he was the one who gave Cornell the prescription drugs, which supposedly led to his suicidal behavior. And we're also told he was the one who found the body. If you're an investigator arriving on the death scene, he's going to be your suspect number one in a possible homicide, because how do you know it's suicide if you haven't looked at the forensics, and you haven't looked at fingerprints, and you haven't done an autopsy, and you haven't waited for laboratory results? None of that was done before this was labeled as suicide, within less than 24 hours and maybe even less than 12 hours. And I was watching all the news and keeping track when it came out, because I knew something didn't seem right from the beginning. So, within less than 24 hours, they've already ruled Martin Kirsten out as a possible suspect, and they're already calling it a suicide. Anyone in their right mind who cares at all is going to suspect something's fishy about this. And they're going to wonder, well, who is this Martin Kirsten guy? Because the only interview we really got from him at all regarding this incident was in the investigative report itself, which was released only in bits and pieces to the public. The only reason I got the whole thing is because I did a Freedom of Information Act request from the county there in Detroit, and I got the whole thing. which I go over in my blog on the Chris Cornell death, which can be found here at batshitcave.blogspot.com in the archive for 2019. I highly recommend checking that out as a primer for all of this. I figured the interview would be designed to just kiss Martin Kirsten's ass and make him look good, which that's exactly what it is. I never heard of this Spirit Farm podcast. I've never heard of this guy, Caleb Anderson, but he just comes off, he's very friendly. I don't know a lot about him, but he comes off as very fake, kind of new agey. And, I don't know. I really question the guy's motives, but he's kind of a clean slate. You don't really know much about him. He's just a smiley face. So the title of the episode is Travels and Trials of a Bodyguard. I assume the travels part is in reference to the fact that Kirsten wasn't born in the United States, but lives here today. Or perhaps it's a reference to the fact his job takes him all over the world. I've also read that Kirsten was called an Aussie at one time, which is a nickname for someone from Australia. Australia comes up nowhere in this interview. They say he's from South Africa. And I thought maybe my memory is betraying me. Maybe I just made that up somewhere in my brain. No, here it is, New Zealand Herald. Heidi Klum's Aussie ex Martin Kirsten found Chris Cornell dead after giving him 2 Ativan pills. So how come now he's not an Aussie anymore? The use of the word trials here is interesting, considering many people believe this man to be a criminal who's never seen proper trials. The title takes the word trials in reference to the subject and turns it into a positive. We're supposed to think Kirsten is this warrior that braved through adversity to become this credible man presented in the interview. But what makes him credible exactly?
The police often question him just because they find him interesting. His beard alone has experienced more than a lesser man's entire body. His blood smells like cologne. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.
Dude, we're going to get into, first of all, you're like one of the most interesting humans in the world and one of my favorite people.
If you've ever seen the original RoboCop film, you might remember, the guy with the 2 girls next to him and he's laughing and he's going, I'd buy that for $1. It's just this, it's like this mental cue. They show it throughout the film, and it kind of represents the way advertisements and marketing campaigns in society, they just stick in your head. And you could be in the middle of anything. You could be in the middle of buying something. You could be in the middle of work. You could be laying in bed at home. You could be robbing a bank, and you see on the TV, I'd buy that for $1, and you laugh. Everyone has the same kind of neuro association with that image and that dialogue, you see? So this is kind of similar to what the Dos Equis marketing campaign did. We all, I think, recognize this guy, this actor, Jonathan Goldman, and this marketing campaign. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, it's Dos Equis. There's just something about it that it's endearing to Americans for whatever reason. Kind of like the way, crappy action films endeared Americans in the 80s. So you've got this phrase, the most interesting man in the world. Now, if you remember that little commercial we just saw, they said at the beginning, police will question him just because they think he's interesting. You see? So he's mysterious, but it's not bad that he's mysterious. It's good because he's interesting. You see? So they're taking this foreign item, which is being marketed to America. Just by mentioning this phrase, as Caleb Anderson does to Martin Kirsten, he says, first of all, you're like one of the most interesting humans in the world. Kirsten has the charisma of a lizard, okay? And the people who wrote this script here, they know exactly what Chris Cornell fans think of him. They know that he's suspect, okay? So they know they've got to take whatever they believe that we think is bad about Kirsten, and they need to turn it on its head and turn it into a positive, turn it into a good thing. And they're using, I believe, a neuro association here. This phrase, the most interesting man, the most interesting human, it's a trigger phrase. And it's supposed to trigger all the funny commercials and all the happy memes. I don't always blank, but when I do, I blank. We've all seen the memes. Caleb Anderson's comment is creating a neuro association between Martin Kirsten and this whole marketing campaign. Now, I'm not saying that this marketing campaign was created years and years ago just for Martin Kirsten. I'm just telling you what it's being used for. And interestingly enough, looks like we've got a square and compass here, don't we? Inside a triangle. Anyway, so a neuroassociation, this is a phrase I first heard when I was taking Tony Robbins' personal power course years ago. Tony Robbins is a motivational speaker. This was many years ago. And neuroassociations are the links between thoughts and emotions in your brain. These links effectively create and shape what you think, how you emotionalize, and behave in various situations. So Tony Robbins' course is designed to recognize neuroassociations, break them where they're negative, and create them where they're positive. Basically put yourself in control of your own neuroassociations. So, this is a science, and it's the science of mind control. So if you go to the YouTube channel and you watch this video, you'll see that they have listed the topics that are discussed in the interview in the order that they actually come up. And the first topic is Kirsten's passion for rhino conservation. Second topic is coming to America and starting with nothing. Third topic is crossing the line with his former client, Heidi Klum. And finally, the topic, probably the only topic that anyone cares about, is losing his friend and client, Chris Cornell, to suicide while he was on the job. It's just interesting that they have to build up to it by talking about these other things. And I think the goal here is to endear Martin Kirsten to us, to ingratiate him to the people that believe he's probably involved in the murder of Chris Cornell, so that by the time they get to the Chris Cornell topic, which he never talks about publicly, and which he doesn't really get into at all here, which we'll see, they want to make it so that they build up his character, and by the time they get to the topic we actually want to hear about, we've fallen in love with his character and we think he's a great guy, and we don't care about the details. Well, they think we're stupid, basically. And it's interesting that they start with rhino conservation, because rhino in political terminology stands for Republican in name only. So that's something interesting to contemplate there.
These animals are getting slaughtered so quickly. We've worked with a couple of orphanages and parks in South Africa that having the security company has afforded me the advantage to buy equipment for the guys, because they don't have much.
The ones who are trying to protect.
The rangers, yeah.
The rangers trying to protect
in the
rhinos.
parks.
It's crazy, man.
It's really crazy. And these guys don't have a lot. Some of the rangers, we've donated everything from a drone to metal detector equipment, because when a rhino is killed and murdered for its horn, that becomes a crime scene. And, they've got to get the bullet out of the carcass, and they've got to find the shell for a fingerprint, or hopefully. And some of these guys, the rangers, are in full-blown firefights with poachers, because it's not just the poacher by himself. It'll be a poacher, the tracker. They'll have a couple of guys with them that have got AK-47 assault rifles.
We know that Chris Cornell gave money to help out endangered and exploited children, and that he may even have been involved with a film exposing child trafficking, The Silent Children, which never came out. This is something the type of stuff Cornell did. It is believed that it was something to do with Cornell's effort to protect children that got him murdered. He stated very clearly, as quoted in previous blogs, that he used his celebrity status to help children in need. This interview is building a similar benevolent characteristic around Martin Kirsten. He states his security company has put him in touch with orphanages in South Africa, if you caught that part, the beginning of that last monologue. Now, why is he working with orphanages in South Africa, and what has that got to do with protecting rhinos there? He doesn't elaborate. Probably because the only reason he used that word orphanages was to project that same protector of children reputation Cornell was known for. See what they're doing here? It's another neuroassociation. They want you to neuroassociate Cornell's protection of children with Martin Kirsten, you see? Without any further detail regarding his work with orphanages, Kirsten instantly segues into how he is helping equip local rangers with gear and resources to combat the poaching problem. And here's a quote from that last clip. When a rhino is killed and murdered for its horn, that becomes a crime scene. Kirsten starts going into detail about how rangers are limited in their capacity to save the rhinos that are being poached in the night, and provides some gruesome detail as to how poachers obtain the horns, and even gets into forensics. He is now talking about murder, killing, and a crime scene. Those are all words that he just used there. Do you think it's a coincidence that Kirsten is talking about murder, killing, and a crime scene in the very same interview in which he brings up Chris Cornell? Yet he abstracts the association by bringing it up in reference to endangered rhinos in another country, so that we subconsciously feel satisfied that Kirsten actually went there without really doing so in the manner people want him to. In other words, this is what we want him to talk about in reference to Chris Cornell, but he doesn't do that. So they know exactly what we want to hear from him. You see, this is a script. Someone wrote this up. I don't believe any of this is organic, and none of these words are an accident. Kirsten mentions an organization he's involved with called Rhino Sheriffs, which appears to have a website, but there's not much information or a way to donate there. Is this a real organization? Kirsten says they don't take donations because there's so much shady things going on online and social media, clicking links, you donate through PayPal or GoFundMe. It seems strange that with all of the different ways to transfer money these days, that Kirsten would decline all the potential donations to his cause simply because he doesn't trust any of them or thinks people don't trust them enough to try. This explanation really doesn't make sense to me. Maybe Rhino Sheriffs, which seems to be based in Long Beach, California, is just a front organization for his image. Even if they are legitimate, charity elevates the image of the person donating. This would be particularly useful to someone with a reputation like Kirsten's.
Rhino Sheriffs. So
Rhino Sheriffs.
Yeah, and we don't take donations, because there's so much shady things going on online, on social media, clicking links, and you donate through PayPal or GoFundMe. So I just put one of the parks that we work with, their link directly, and
Directly to them,
and direct goes to them, and how you can help. Small things is people are always asking me, how can I help?
Yeah.
I don't want to give money because it's shady. Okay, don't give money. Educate someone.
Yeah.
Just go sit down and talk to two people. If the thousands and millions of people that care about rhino conservation or wildlife conservation talk to two people each, that's spreading the word.
Yeah, making an impact.
Right.
If you click this, it just goes back to the same page. If you the home page, click home, goes to the home page. Contact us. You get a generic contact screen here, and gallery. Got some rhinos, some sketchy looking body cam footage or whatever. Some note from Pilane's Bird Counter Poaching Unit saying, Martin Kirsten, you're great. Thank you for the canteen and everything else you sent. Some grainy photos of a rhino, some elongated weird picture of a rhino, and Martin Kirsten in some plane somewhere, could be anywhere in the world. Picture of a rhino. And this thing about Martin Kirsten, wearing a rhino shirt, save the rhinos. So I don't know. I mean, there's nowhere to donate here, as he said, and I don't see any link to some park that you can learn more information about and donate directly to. So maybe they took it down since the interview was made. The way Martin Kirsten's talking about just inform people and, force multiply. You tell people, they tell people, just spread the word. I just feel like he's sort of appropriating the same thing that we're trying to do with this Chris Cornell awareness, awareness of the fact that he was murdered, or at the very least that we were lied to about the facts of the case, that the evidence does not support suicide, and that yet the media told us that anyway. I mean, I feel like they're appropriating that mentality and kind of trying to shift it and allocate that to Martin Kirsten. So again, the people that suspect Martin Kirsten to be a bad person or involved in the Cornell murder, I think people that think this way are the target audience here, to be honest, because who else gives a shit about Martin Kirsten, what he does? You know what I mean? I mean, that's great that he wants to save rhinos. I mean, if you're an animal lover, that's appealing. But, I don't know. The whole thing just seems a little shaky, questionable. Like someone just spending some money to keep their horse shit narrative going here. I mean, if they're willing to go through this trouble to make Martin Kirsten look good, it must mean the campaign, whatever the campaign was to get rid of Chris Cornell, it's still going. It shows that they are acutely aware that there are people that don't buy it.
So you obviously come from South Africa.
Born and raised. Still trying to talk like you guys.
No, nonsense. You never do
hacky
that.
South African accent. I hope there's subtitles on this for the English viewers.
No, you keep that accent. It gives you so much credibility. I feel like people with accents just like walk into a room and automatically have more credibility.
So that's the way I feel about American accents.
I don't know why Khalib Anderson is making such a big deal about Martin Kirsten's accent, because in the first place, to my American ears, he has a very light accent. I mean, you can only really hear it with certain words, and it's very understandable. It's not like a thick Scottish accent or even a guttural British accent. I mean, I've heard, Scottish accents where I had no idea what the guy was saying, let alone, a Chinese accent or, a French accent, an Italian accent. So I feel like Khalib Anderson is making a big deal about Martin Kirsten's, quote unquote, foreign roots, either to distract from what's really important or to, provide damage control for some narrative about him being some kind of international spy or, I feel like the most interesting man in the world comment kind of plays into that a little bit. Like they want us to see him as like this cool James Bond type guy, because the assumption being because he's really the opposite. He's really some sort of spy for MI5 or something like that. I don't know. But clearly they're making a big deal about it for a reason here. And whenever he says, keep the accent, it reminds me of this interview that I know I saw back in the early 90s with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I couldn't find it. I looked for it, but it's out there somewhere. And when he came out, he was kind of riding the coattails of Arnold Schwarzenegger, another muscly guy with a heavy accent, who was in action films. And he says that Arnold told him, gave him some advice, and he said, keep the accent. So I feel like Khalib Anderson is tapping into that same kind of silly stereotype of the guy who can barely act and who has a thick accent but still manages to make millions of dollars in some big blockbuster film. I feel like they want us to see Martin Kirsten this way. It just feels like a desperate attempt to improve his character without providing any real specific detail about him. And funny enough, Martin Kirsten mentions Arnold Schwarzenegger later in the interview. He says, I wanted to be like Arnold. He started in Venice Beach. They're talking about how Kirsten wanted to be a personal trainer when he first came to America. And he wanted to be like Arnold. So, I think I'm onto something with this.
So yeah, my mom had a tough time with us. My dad committed suicide when I was 6. And,
when you're 6?
Yeah, and my brother was younger. He was 4.
You were the oldest?
I was the oldest of 2 boys. And that left my mom with, raising 2 boys became a really blue-collar suburb of Johannesburg, Mayfair. And
you were the man of the house at 6?
Not really. I decided to go the other route, fighting and getting up to no good. And my brother stayed on the education path.
He did.
I went and got a tattoo and a pierced ear and, pulled over by police with a 16-year-old learner's license that had expired, and every wrong decision I could have made as a kid, I did. And eventually got kicked out of high school.
You did?
Yeah, I didn't finish. And we got the call on a Sunday night, and it's the military police. And
you're coming with us.
Mr. Kirsten, tomorrow morning, be at the bus station. I'm like, what if I don't? And they'd be like, don't let us come find you. And so I did. I showed up. And
did you sleep that night?
I mean,
because you were a kid. You must be like
17.
17 years old. I mean, you're going into the South African military not by choice.
No.
Were you
had to go?
What were you doing the night before? Like,
I don't know. I don't even think I packed a bag.
Really?
I think I had like a backpack of stuff, and you don't know what to expect. And you just know that it's an intake that, periodically throughout the year they back then it was the old South Africa, so white South Africans had to attend. You either went to college after school or you went to the military.
In the next part of the interview, Kirsten begins revealing information about his past that I've never heard before. While it is obviously tragic if his father truly did commit suicide when he was a child, I have no way of knowing whether he's telling the truth or not. But whatever the case, it seems an odd coincidence that Kirsten would decide to reveal such close, first-hand experience with suicide in the same interview he chooses to speak publicly about his former client. A former client that was said to have committed suicide, which is not supported by the official investigative report. And while Cornell did have a father growing up, he said in interviews that he didn't really even know him. So in a sense, Kirsten's story echoes Cornell's fatherless upbringing. Kirsten goes on to speak about the difficulty his mother had in raising him and his brothers in a blue-collar suburb. Blue-collar equals working class. In other words, he's not from a privileged background. He was an everyday working man. This echoes Cornell's story, in which he famously worked as a cook at a seafood store. Those of us who know Cornell's story are aware of his working class background and humble beginnings. Is Kirsten's story here simply fiction designed to ingratiate him to those very people that see him as the secret murderer of his former client? And this is from Wiki right here. Before becoming a successful musician, he, Cornell, worked as a busboy, as a dishwasher, as a fishmonger at a seafood wholesaler, and was a sous chef at Ray's Boathouse in Seattle. So this part of Cornell's story has been known for a long time. Kirsten goes on talking about how he got into trouble as a youth, much like Cornell, who was very open about his profuse use of drugs at a very young age. At 17, Kirsten says he was forced into the military by his mother due to his bad behavior. Some examples he provides are getting a tattoo, getting an earring, playing the class clown. My, what a disruptor he was. Then he goes on to state that all white males in South Africa were required to either attend college or enter the military. Are they exaggerating or fabricating this whole thing with his bad behavior just to depict him in a way they think Cornell fans can relate to? I mean, it's one thing to say that you were forced into the military. It's another thing if you live in a society that forces you to make a decision to stay in college or go into the military.
Kind of that ends, and you start your own thing, or you're running your own company, and you get married, and you marry an amazing American who I adore, and you guys are just the coolest couple. How did that come in?
Yeah, that was my life changer, and just some context on that. I was raised Catholic in South Africa.
Okay,
and as a young Catholic boy, I'm sure you've been to a Catholic church. They're beautiful, right? They've got these stained glass windows and statues and wooden benches, but it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. I had a lot of questions. We'd do something wrong, and you go to confession, and you tell the priest what you've done wrong, and Father, this is what I've done wrong, and he'd listen and go, okay, 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers, and you're good to go. Really? Yeah. Wow. Okay. Try not to do it again. And I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week. Were you just winging that? Did you just make that up? Yeah. Can I really just?
And so that was really bizarre to me. And let me say that I'm sure that there's people watching and listening to this that need the Catholicism way in the Catholic faith, and I'm sure that's great. But from an individual standpoint, you have to find what works for you. And it didn't help when all those priests were exposed, and the news came out with all the dozens of them or hundreds of them with the little boys. And I said to my mother, "See, that's why I'm out."
See, Mom.
And I found meditation. I found transcendental meditation, and it helped me a lot. Just sitting quietly twice a day for 20 minutes. And
how did you find that? Up in LA?
Up in LA, yeah. I'd done a Tony Robbins seminar,
okay,
and I'd done a couple of self-help workshops, because you're always looking. You're trying to better yourself and find meaning. What what is this all about? And,
Well, and just for people that might not be aware, transcendental meditation has to do 20 minutes. I think
20 minutes.
I've heard that as a number, and then there's like a chant, almost like a noise.
It's a word.
Now, before we move on here, look at the body language. Look what Khalib Anderson's foot is doing here. It keeps moving around. First it's over here, then it's over here, and now it's right in the middle. And this part right here is where he says, and now you're dating a wonderful, beautiful American woman. I could spend a lot of time on the body language and symbolism in this video, but I won't do that. But I just thought I would point that out because it's just very blatant there. But as I said, he emphasizes the word American for some reason. And he uses terminology like, now you're in the family and things like this. And again, I feel like this interview, they keep focusing upon the fact that Martin Kirsten is a foreigner from another country. And I have several theories as to why they're doing that. But another one I'll just introduce here and lay out on the table is that maybe they're trying to appeal to, Cornell fans' empathy for people from other countries seeking asylum or people seeking a better life. This is in the news a lot because our border is being overrun by illegal aliens. If you look at the numbers, they're higher than they've ever been in history by far. So I'm not saying there's definitely a connection there, but it's something that occurred to me that I thought I would mention as one of my theories as to why they keep, bringing this up. This whole, Kirsten is from another country thing. So they briefly touch upon the whole Heidi Klum story, and Kirsten talks about how he violated rule number 1 in the workplace, not to date your clients. Again, I think the whole Heidi Klum, relationship, I feel like that was just a publicity stunt done to sort of humanize Martin Kirsten. And I could be wrong about that, so there's not really much more to say about that. Although Chris Cornell's mother, Karen, is supposedly Jewish, he referred to his father as Roman Catholic and associated his father's identity as a Roman Catholic with his alcoholic, non-present form of parenting. Kirsten also claims to come from a Catholic background and adds that part of what turned him off to the religion was the pedophile priests. As stated earlier, Cornell's interest in protecting children is what many believe made him a target of those not wanting to be exposed. Now, here we have the man many believe was involved with Cornell's murder speaking about pedophilia, albeit within a vague and passive context. With a religion like that, meaning Catholicism, it's not designed for anyone to question. Being young people who have a natural curiosity and half a brain, you're going to start finding inconsistencies, which there are tons of in organized religion. There's more quotations from Chris Cornell as well, where he talks about being in a classroom and him and his, classmate were cornering the teacher on his hypocrisy and he couldn't, respond. It's very similar to what Martin Kirsten was just saying. It's almost as if the script writers of this interview, read up on Cornell and were just, as I said earlier, allocating stuff to Martin Kirsten in order to ingratiate him to the people they want to win over, the Chris Cornell fans, of course. Kirsten goes on, I found transcendental meditation and it helped me a lot. I'd done a Tony Robbins seminar and I'd done a couple self-help workshops. Well, isn't that interesting? Remember when Tony Robbins came up earlier when we were talking about neuroassociations? Kirsten goes a little bit into his spiritual practices and gets into a bit of self-help New Age territory, which seems to be a theme behind this podcast. But interestingly, Chris Cornell's mother wrote books about this sort of thing, such as Transformation and Transcendence. Is someone just taking aspects of Cornell's life and simply writing them into Martin Kirsten's story? Convenient that we really know nothing about his past. He can just make it up right here and we'd not be the wiser. And you can see this book here. I talk about Karen Cornell in my other videos about Chris Cornell. And you can see her name's right here. There's videos of her out there. There's interviews. Now, I have noticed over time, some of this stuff is getting memory hold. So if you want to see screenshots and stuff like that, you can look through my posts, and I have a lot of them there. But I have a feeling someone wants Karen Cornell to just sort of disappear, and, they don't want people looking into her.
She gave me her number, and we set up a coffee date when I got back from New York, and we met for coffee, and that was our first date. It lasted 9 hours.
Really?
Yeah, we did not come up for air. It was amazing, and that cliche, you know when you know.
Yeah.
I knew, And,
did you guys just go to the beach?
No, we had a coffee shop, and they eventually closed. And
you were sat at a coffee shop for 9 hours?
Until they closed. And then we went to a restaurant, tried to get something to eat, and then they closed.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So while Khalib Anderson's foot looks like it's about to go right between Martin Kirsten's legs, he's telling the story about the magical story about how he met his current wife. Now, this story about the coffee shop made me think of that really crappy movie Singles, which came out in the 90s. It was kind of like it was attempting to capture the Seattle grunge phenomenon at its peak. And Eddie Vedder was in it, and you can see here Chris Cornell was in it. And one of the main characters is a coffee bar waitress, which riffs off of Seattle coffee shop culture. Seattle is incidentally the birthplace of Starbucks, by the way. And I remember this too. I was kind of a grunger myself, and I hung around coffee shops a lot. Not Starbucks, before Starbucks sort of, ruined all that culture. So Kirsten says, we met for coffee, and that was our first date. We lasted 9 hours. Again, is any of this real, or is someone just making this shit up for Kirsten to incorporate into his story, to ingratiate him to old grungers? I mean, who cares about Chris Cornell's death? Well, that would be people like me, old grungers, right? So again, it's like they're just trying to ingratiate us to Martin Kirsten. Like, oh, he's just one of us, He got an earring and a tattoo and dropped out of school, and he was raised Catholic and he thought it was stupid. And you know what I mean? It's just like, come on. Are they, how naive do they think we are to just eat all this up?
I got to do the wedding for you and Robin up on a cliff. That was so rad.
Then you're part of my worst night of my life, which ironically was just a month later. Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, again, I can't get into too many specifics, but it was a client that committed suicide on tour.
Yeah.
And you go that worst case scenario, it is just something you don't plan for. My best friend in high school committed suicide. My father committed suicide, and now him. And it was a hard night. And
I remember you saying that you had taken, because it was a big show in Detroit, and you had taken everything into account. Like you were thinking through.
Yeah, the whole tour. Who's jumping up on stage, who's this, who's that.
All the details.
What's
everything that could go wrong.
You try.
All the scenarios, but not that one.
Not that one.
No, that's
heavy and hard, and it took a long time to heal. Fortunately, you were part of my healing process, and my guys were able to look after the day-to-day operations of the company. So my men's Bible study group rallied around too, and I went for therapy, and my wife and I, we were fortunate enough to just get out of town. We went to Yosemite for a while, phones off, and just start again. And
So Martin, the client that you're talking about is Chris Cornell, and the events, the circumstances, so difficult over the days and weeks and months that followed. How did your journey, your path, the stuff that we've talked about in terms of faith or and your wife, your community, how did you get through all of that?
Initially, the shock and the horror and the sadness and the just it's your world crashing down. And the rebuild starts, and it was tough, but I had a lot of good people around me that surrounded me with love and prayer, and you got to get past the doubt and the sadness and the what did I miss, and it felt like I'd been, just encapsulated in a bubble, and I tried my best to keep my head up, shoulders back, and keep going, because as hard as it is, life, it does go on, and through my father's death, through my best friend's death, and then through my client, it knocks you back, and it knocks you, hurts to the core. Yeah. But one step at a time, one day at a time.
But one of the things that I love about you, Martin, is that you let yourself hurt to the core. Like you care deeply, and you love people well. And so when things don't go well, when the worst case scenario happens, you're not a cold, callous guy. You feel all the feelings, and you care deeply about what you do, and you care deeply for people.
Thank you.
And I don't think I wouldn't think that that's normal for people at your level of protectors.
So I guess this self-described pastor guy, Caleb Anderson, is the pastor of some type of church that Martin Kirsten goes to with his wife, and whose name is Robin, I guess. And he reveals here that he was married to her just a month before Cornell died. And so this is the guy he went crying on his shoulders to when, after that thing happened. And if you notice, there's absolutely no detail here regarding what occurred that night. It's just a big feel sorry for Martin Kirsten fest. And, again, if his father committed suicide and if his brother committed suicide, well, of course, that's horrible. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But it's just kind of convenient for the story that he has this, history of being around people that just happen to kill themselves. And so now we're supposed to be overwhelmed with our feelings of grief for Martin Kirsten, poor Martin Kirsten. They're making it all about him, all about his feelings. This has got nothing to do with the fact that the official investigative report surrounding the Cornell death doesn't just contradict itself and the mainstream narrative, it actually leans stronger towards murder and foul play. So if Martin Kirsten is a really big fan of law enforcement, which he says he is in one part of this interview, why does he seem so very oblivious to what is in the official investigative report and the media's ubiquitous lies surrounding it all? And Caleb Anderson, his response is to just tell you how to view Martin Kirsten. You let yourself hurt to the core. You care deeply, and you love people well. I wouldn't think that's normal for people at your level of protectors. He also uses a weird phrase earlier, like you went into guarding, which sounds kind of like gardener, which reminded me of Soundgarden. I could sit here and pick apart all this dialogue and probably make the blog twice as long, but I think you'd probably get bored with that. But ultimately, the crescendo in that last little segment that I emphasized is where Caleb Anderson says, you're not this cold, callous guy. I think that's the purpose of this entire interview. It's to portray Martin Kirsten in the opposite light that his detractors perceive him, which is cold and callous and possibly even a murderer.
I know, I've got a good friend at the FBI that has been insanely generous, inviting me to trainings and speakings there, where they share statistics of active shooter events and just how the world is changing. It's not the world we grew up in, and if I can help train people to better defend themselves, better equip themselves when, God forbid, that moment ever happens in their life, that they can prepare for it. Because one of the theories of active shooter, the goals is run, hide, fight. And we focus on that because a lot of people don't know.
So after completely glossing over the details of what happened to his former client, Chris Cornell, and just completely focusing on his own feelings about how bad he felt after all of it, Martin Kirsten starts talking about how he's friends with an FBI agent, and how he actually participates in their training drills. This suggests something I would not have brought up otherwise. Is Kirsten an undercover Fed or a contractor for them? It would certainly make sense in this age of a weaponized U.S. Department of Justice, who conduct unconstitutional raids upon their political opponents as if they have the authority. It's frightening to consider, but the FBI would have the ability to murder someone like Cornell and totally control all of the law enforcement and media surrounding the event. Using taxpayer dollars, of course, which would be an endless supply. Because we don't know where our tax dollars really go. Kirsten begins talking about active shooter events. This is interesting considering the horrible Mandalay Bay concert shooting occurred the same year Cornell died, and the same year, I guess, Kirsten got married. Mandalay Bay also happens to be owned by MGM. MGM Grand Detroit was the hotel Cornell died in. I don't claim to know much more than I did a few years ago about Cornell's death, but it becomes more and more obvious that it was an operation that could only have been organized at a high level of power and influence. I believe this interview is one of many influence campaigns designed to direct attention away from something. They can deprive the public of the truth all they want. They can feed us lies all they want. But when we begin to recognize patterns in their mind control techniques, their magical spell of influence rapidly dissipates. And for most of us, this may be the only path to justice, accountability, and prevention. I would encourage everyone reading this to take a moment and say a prayer for justice and truth in the Chris Cornell death. Even if just one of these types of events is exposed for what it is on a mass scale, the domino effect will likely lead to many more exposures and shine a light on the darkest pockets of our society. The more we shine the light of truth, the less places they will have to hide and accomplish their evil deeds.